Everyone, welcome to another webinar in the series Removing Roadblocks from Getting Published. I'm here today with Sophfronia Scott, my good friend from Sandy Hook, Connecticut, where she continues to fight a losing battle against the weeds in her flower beds. At least not the snow this year. She holds a BA in English from Harvard and an MFA in Writing, Fiction, and Creative Nonfiction from Vermont College of Fine Arts. Her latest novel is Unforgivable Love from the William Morrow division of HarperCollins. She's also recently published a spiritual memoir, This Child of Faith, Raising a Spiritual Child in a Secular World, which she co-wrote with her son Tane, and that's from Paraclete Press. And also an essay collection called Love's Long Line from Ohio State University Press and Mad Creek Books. Sophfronia teaches creative writing at Regis University's Mile High MFA and Bay Path University's MFA in Creative Nonfiction. Sophfronia has also partnered with me for Frederick Buechner's Writers Workshops, for Writing for Your Life conferences, for Publishing in Color conferences. She's an awesome speaker, an awesome person, and a wonderful friend. And I'm so glad to have her here for this webinar today.
Thank you, Brian. I'm happy to be here.
So we're going to just do, a Q&A with Sophfronia about various aspects of getting published and her experiences. So as I mentioned earlier, this is a series called Removing Roadblocks to Getting Published. So, Sophfronia, can you tell us a little bit about some of the roadblocks you encountered when you were first wanting to get books published and what you did to overcome them?
Well, rejection is a huge roadblock. My first novel was rejected well over 20 times, and, for various reasons. Now, I would say that rejection alone would say, okay, I'm just going to scrap this book. But I think it helps to know your own strengths as a writer. I knew that that book had value. I knew that it was good. I wasn't perfect, but I knew that that it was possible to sell it, that there was a market. So it's hard to say that you have to hang in there, right? So some of getting over a roadblock is to keep going, and you're either going to get over it or you're going to move through it. I was really persistent, and my agent was great as well. She kept sending the book out. Now today, you would have another decision there, because when that first novel came out, self-publishing wasn't as prevalent as it is now, and there weren't as many small publishers, putting out new material, and small publishers have a greater respect in the industry now. So there shouldn't be as many roadblocks, because there are more avenues, many more avenues to getting published. It helps to know why you want to get published, what you want to get out of being published, because that will help you choose which road you're going to take, and that will also help you decide how to get through the roadblocks. Does that make sense now, Brian?
Oh, absolutely. No, I mean, we're going to talk about, that more, throughout this entire conversation, but absolutely. So you've published with several different publishing houses in several different genres. Can you talk a little bit about the process, how that's different, depending upon the house, depending upon the genre?
Yeah, well, first of all, you have to understand what it is that you're writing and know, what is the best avenue for it. So, for example, my fiction, I believe is mass market potential, right? So I know that book clubs will read that fiction, and so I know it would be attractive to a bigger publishing house. My essays are, not necessarily mass market, but they're really good, and they can be taught in academia. And so I knew that a smaller university press would be appropriate for that collection. So what is the difference between all of these different publishers is that money is a big difference. Like, not all publishers have the same amount of money. The support that you get will be different. I'm not saying it's more over the other. It will just be different. For example, my book that you mentioned that I wrote with my son is published by Paraclete Press. Now that's a smaller press, and it's focuses on spiritual, religious material. I did get an advance for that book. It's a smaller advance, but I did get an advance. Their support, their marketing support, though, has been huge. It is as though they are a big publisher because they have very persistent publicists who will make the phone calls and really push getting you interviews and getting the book reviewed. They also have a great design department. So every time I got a speaking engagement, they would connect with that place and offer to print posters and flyers, and they made book plates that I could use that my son would sign if he wasn't going to the event with me, so that we could put his name in the book. They had strengths in that respect. They can also put a book out faster. They just work on a different timeline. So I finished writing that book in the spring of 2017, and that book was out by the end of the year. Whereas with William Morrow, that book was sold in 2016, but it didn't come out until late 2017. It's just a different time frame. That may not matter to you as a writer. Some people, for example, a friend of mine was publishing with the hope that he could get his book out during his sabbatical, because he knew that that would be the time that he could travel and promote the book. So it mattered to him that he needed to get it out sooner rather than later. So I guess what I'm saying is there are all of these different considerations that come into play. A company like William Morrow can get their phone picked up first, right? If they're calling or get their email answered if they're calling magazines or radio stations. But at the same time, that doesn't mean that you're not getting the same sort of support from a smaller publishing house. It is a team effort. You're not just going to go to a big publishing house and say, oh, they're going to do this all for me. It is a team effort. And whether it's a big publisher or a small publisher, you have to bring something to the table in terms of your willingness to be out there, to make connections, and to help sell your book.
That's really, I think, very helpful information, Sophfronia, and it really speaks to the amount of research that a person needs to do on the different publishing houses and the potential fit or not fit for the different types of books. And again, you've done such a wide range of books that I think you also have a wide range of knowledge and experience relative to the publishing house spectrum.
Yeah, I think the research piece is key, because sometimes writers get caught up in something with a process that they think they're supposed to be doing. Like, for example, I need an agent. They think that I need an agent and nothing can happen until I get an agent. But what they don't know is your book might be more appropriate for a middle-sized publishing house that doesn't require you to have an agent for them to read your manuscript. So you've spent all these months on something that you don't even need, that you didn't know that. So you have to do that research. It also helps to go to places like the Association of Writers and Writing Programs. That's a huge writers conference, but the great thing about that conference is that they have a humongous book fair where almost every single literary journal and publishing house under the sun is represented. And it's the same thing with Writing for Your Life and Publishing in Color and all of your conferences. You have publishers there, and you can go there, meet someone in person, and find out what they need to review your manuscript. You may not need an agent, especially if you're meeting that editor in person right then and there. So you have to get out there and figure out what your publishing road requires.
But you also mentioned, how helpful your agent has been to you too, in working the landscape of, some of that market, right?
Oh, absolutely. And I'm lucky enough, my agent is also a great editing eye. She's been in the business long enough. I trust her opinion when it comes to reviewing a manuscript. I just saw her this week, in fact, and I said to her, I'm working on this manuscript, and it occurred to me I'm trying to make a decision whether to have this plot happen at the beginning of the book or at the end of the book, and I'm struggling with this decision. I said, I should just ask you, Brittany. I sent it to her just yesterday. I said, look, I'm going to send it to you. You tell me, and I'll, go from there. So yeah, it's truly helpful to have that professional ear.
And you've also had a writing partner that you've worked with in the past too. Maybe you could explain that kind of process to folks because they may not be familiar with that model.
Well, that's an accountability thing. So what you're talking about is my writing buddy, David, who lives in Colorado. And several times a week, we have an appointment tomorrow. In fact, we get on, we're actually using Zoom now. It used to be Google Hangouts, but now we use Zoom. But at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning, David and I will be on screen, just like you and I are now, only we'll be at our desks writing. You know, we'll call each other up and say, okay, how are you doing? What are you working on today? And say, oh, I'm working on this book proposal. And then we just sit there at our desks and write. And we keep each other company. It's like sharing an office, but we're in different states. And it's just, you know, we're sitting there. I'm going to sit there and write for 3 hours because David is sitting there writing for 3 hours. And we've been doing that for 4 years now. And it's an amazing thing. And we get a lot of work done just because we make the time to sit there and write. The
discipline, like you said, and the accountability is just amazing, isn't it? A part of it, yes, human nature that, you know, is, you know, inestimable.
Yeah. And what's great about it is that, you know, he and I are very focused on our writing in the same way. You know, we both have similar goals and we can share frustrations when that work starts going out there in the world. You know, he had his first novel rejected many times, but we actually sold our novels. I sold Unforgivable Love and he sold his first novel within a few weeks of each other. So it was like, you know, 2017 was like a celebratory lap for us because, you know, we did that together, even though we weren't sharing work or anything. Just the fact that we sit in the same space and write, we accomplished that together.
That's so cool. So I always tell Sophfronia she's one of the busiest authors that I know. She travels a lot. She's always out there doing events and meeting with people. And just talk to people a little bit about how you choose, you know, which events that you prioritize amongst that very busy schedule.
Yeah, you know, I was just on the phone before this call with a friend who was trying to figure out her writing life. And what I said to her, I will share with you here, is that you have to know who you want to be as a writer. You know, what does it mean for you to be a writer? What are the types of things that you want to do? Because only that will help you to decide whether to say yes or no to the opportunities that present themselves. So, for example, I went to Hope College recently. I was asked to be a visiting writer there. And, you know, I love being visiting writers at colleges because, you know, the visibility is wonderful. But also, it's usually connected to my essay collection. And it's important for the sale of that book to be taught at the college level. So I want to make those connections and have my material read. And that means other teachers will learn about me as well. It's like, well, if someone taught that book, then I should be teaching that book, right? So it's not just about me showing up and then posting this on Facebook. It's about other people learning about the book. I just had published just this week, came out an anthology that I'm in called On Being 40-ish. And we had a book launch just last night in Brooklyn. I'm going to be in Cambridge next week. And I'm doing a radio interview that I have to travel into New York City for. And the publicist is saying to me, you know, thank you for being willing to do this. And I'm like, no, of course I'm going to do this because this is making me visible in a certain way, right? So who's going to see these radio interviews? Who's going to show up at the bookstore in Cambridge? You don't know. And doing that will lead to other things, right? So I have a vision of being known in a certain way in the writing world. And in order to do that, I have to, you know, I think the phrase is you have to be somewhere and be somebody. So that's essentially what I'm doing.
Well, I've always been impressed with your willingness to do that. And you know, networking is just such an important aspect of success in any business and being out there. And you do a wonderful job at that.
You know, it's interesting, Brian. I was on this phone call. We were talking about that word networking because I think it makes people nervous and they think they have to go out there and hand out business cards and do something that feels unnatural to them. But really, networking is about connecting to people that some of them you already know and you already like them and they're already doing things and they already want to help you. And it's a matter of letting people know what it is that you're doing so that they can participate in the journey. Sometimes it's just about being vocal about what you're already doing. So I explained to this writer, we're talking about social media, and why be active in social media and what is it like? For me, social media is just me talking about the things that I already do. And the opportunities have come to me because people see in my social media, they're like, oh, and I say this, Brian, because that's how you found me, right? I'm posting in social media about Frederick Buechner because I'm reading him and I'm teaching him at my church. And so you knew that well, wow, here's a writer and she's already engaged in this. I'm going to ask her. Right? So that's all networking is. You are already connected to people. You are connected to people you went to college with. You are connected to people you work with, that your children go to school with. All it is letting them know this is what I'm doing. And if you have to ask for something, then ask. But you already know a group of people. It's just activating that network to help you do the thing that you want to do.
And the relationship building, I think that goes along with all of that. I mean, it's so important. And you raised such a great example of us. I mean, look at, from that very beginning, look how many things we've done together. Yeah. And other people that we've introduced each other to. And, it just goes on in terms of the value of when you find someone that that you want to have a strong relationship with, how incredibly valuable that can be.
Yeah, that was it's been 3 years now.
Oh,
right?
More than that.
Something like that. So,
more than that. We're getting old.
But it's truly incredible. The people I've met because of you. Susanna Childress. Let's you do a step. Susanna Childress is a poet and a writer. She writes about faith as well, and she's the one who invited me to Hope College. I met her because you connect the dots. People like Sarah Arthur, who I met through you, right? And writing, learning about the Festival of Faith of Writing, which I didn't know about except for you. And I'm meeting all of these people and doing more things connected to faith. And I was invited to edit an essay series on faith because someone had seen the work that I was doing with you. And through that, I met Susanna, and then I end up at Hope College. I meet more people at Hope College. It just,
it blossomed.
Yeah.
And so just to put in a plug, Sophfronia and I are going to be working together this spring and in June at Drew University Theological Seminary. There's both a Writing for Your Life conference there and a Publishing in Color conference there during the week. And Sophfronia and I are going to be there together the whole week working together. So it's another great opportunity to collaborate.
Absolutely. And I met Lynn Westfield at Publishing in Color last year, and Lynn and I have been doing things together now. I feel like she's like a big sister to me.
She's awesome. She's totally awesome.
She's amazing.
So we've got a question that's come in from our audience. What is the best way to approach an editor or publisher at a conference?
You mean, do I walk up to them and say, here's my book?
Exactly. How not to do it, right?
Right? Well, first of all, you want to know what it is they do, right? So instead of starting this conversation about who you are and what you have and read my book, find out who that person is. Ask about their publishing house. What type of material does she read and what is she looking for? If that fits in with what you're doing, you can say, well, actually, I'm working on something like that, and that might fit in with what you're doing. Here's what it is. But you're looking to find out about that person first, right? Phil, who you met, Phil Fox Rose, who is the editor who acquired This Child of Faith. When I first met Phil, we were having a conversation about fiction, and he was looking to acquire fiction writers. And that was not what I was doing, but I was engaging him in that conversation and brainstorming with him about writers and where he could look for the material that he wanted. Now, that eventually led to a conversation months later where he asked me what I was doing, and he was looking to acquire a certain piece, and I said, I have that, yes, and sent him a book proposal. But you have to first figure out what they're interested in. And that's what you were just talking about, Brian, in terms of relationship building. Then it's not like you're saying, oh, here, read my book, and they say no, and you walk away. You're looking to find out what they're into and to build that relationship. And it may lead to you working with them.
And even if the person that you're talking to doesn't have, a direct fit for what you're doing, oftentimes I've found they'll suggest someone else for you to talk to.
Exactly.
This company is looking for what you're doing, or here's an editor or an agent or whoever, that would be a valuable contact. So people are so willing, it seems to me, to help each other.
Yes,
in this
exactly.
industry.
Exactly.
And then there's also the time consideration that you just mentioned too. It's like, just because something doesn't make sense in terms of a relationship now, between two people or two companies, a year from now or 2 years from now or whatever, that could well change.
Yes. And you're also looking to connect, ideally, other writers too. So it's not just about me. I'm in this community of writers. So I like to be in a position to also say, I know this writer, she could be right for you. He could be right for you. So, we all help each other in this.
So let's switch gears and talk about something we touched on a moment ago, which is social media. You're not only one of the most active authors on social media, I think that you're one of the most effective users of social media. So you want to talk a little bit about kind of what's your strategy for that?
It's interesting. When I first made this focus, back in 2011, I think it was, to really focus on my writing life, the first thing I did was I changed my social media. I changed my Twitter feed. So I used to follow a lot of entrepreneurs, but I decided that I wanted to be more in the literary world, in the literary community. And the first thing I did was I started following more writers and started engaging with them about whatever they were talking about in terms of their work and what they were reading. I also felt, and I've always felt this, that your social media has to be reflective of who you are, and it can only be authentic when you do that. So I feel that my social media is about my story, right? It's about my life, and I'm sharing with you what this journey has been about. So when I made that change in my life, I was talking about it in my social media. I was talking about going back to earn my MFA. I was talking about learning to drive a school bus so that financially I could do that. So all along this path, it's been this journey, and the people who follow me have been on that journey. So when I say, look, here's this book, it's not just about me selling that book. It's people saying, wow, she did it, right? So that's just me. That's my choice about my social media. So I let people know, this is what I'm doing. This is my work. This is my life. And I share that. Look, I'm at this reading event, and here I am trying to get home from Hope College in the snow.
Right.
Here's what I'm doing, and here's what I'm thinking. Here's my son. My son and I do speaking events together. Look at the way he's engaging with the audience. Isn't that amazing? Right? So I think people think social media is that you get on there and say, buy my book, buy my book, buy my book. That is annoying. And
some people do, and that is annoying.
Exactly. And you don't like follow people like that. But people get into social media because they want to know you as a real person. Now, you can decide what the limits are in that. I make choices about what I share and what I don't share. But I do feel that it's important to be a presence, because publishers look at that. They want to know, can you engage an audience? Can you help sell a book? And the fact that I'm out there and they know that I'm out there, I think does help my career.
So you do one thing that's really interesting that I want to touch on, both because it's novel, it's unique, and it's also, I think, offering some value and nourishment for folks, which is and I'm probably going to describe this incorrectly, but the writer's walks that you record.
The morning walks.
Right. Tell folks about that may not be familiar with it.
Yes. I started doing a YouTube. I have a YouTube channel, and I started doing Your Morning Walk with Sophfronia. And it's just these little videos, they're about 4 minutes each, of me walking. I'm out walking in my neighborhood, or I'm walking around New Haven, Connecticut, wherever I happen to be that morning. and I just spend 4 minutes talking about writing or the writing life. And that came about because to me, it was like an offshoot of my social media, because I do like to share when I'm out doing interesting things. And I happened to be at a writers festival last fall, and I was like, there's some cool stuff happening here. I just want to talk about this. And I took out my phone and did it. And it felt right. It felt authentic that this is something I would be doing anyway. I'd like to be out and about in the mornings. I'm thinking about things and thinking about my writing. Why not share that? So it's been a really cool thing. I have to film another one tomorrow, in fact, because I've made this commitment to myself to do one every week now for this year. And I've gotten gadgets now. Like I have a stabilizer to help me, make smooth videos, and I have a microphone so that the wind doesn't interfere. So I feel like I'm all geared up for this, but it's great to see the response to it. Now, some people may say, oh, well, you're doing these videos and there aren't a lot of people watching them. Well, there weren't a lot of people watching them in the beginning. Then suddenly here's a video that has 100 views, and here's another one that has 180 views. You start something, and if you're consistent with it, people will find you and it will grow. So I'm still in the early stages with this, but I'm fully confident that this will become a great thing. And it also provides material for my website, because I post these videos as blogs. This means I'm constantly refreshing my website in a way that I wasn't doing before. And it also gives people a sense of who I am. They feel that they can get to know me. You also don't know, sometimes producers, like television producers, seriously, before they ask you to be on their show, they want to see that you can be on camera. So, I have, video footage out there, so people can automatically say, oh, she can do this. Let's, call her up.
I think it is such a great idea for so many reasons, as you just said. And I think it's also such a good example of, the two things that I preach the most to folks about social media are consistency and persistency.
Yes.
It's just like, you've got to stick with it. You've got to be consistent. And you've done that very, very well. So if you haven't seen some of our morning walks, you'll probably see me reposting them on Writing for Your Life or Publishing in Color social media channels too.
Yeah, thank you for doing that, Brian.
Oh, sure, of course. So we touched on your latest novel, Unforgivable Love, which I think is just so fascinating about that concept. So can you talk a little bit about how you thought of the idea?
Oh, so you mean the concept that it's a retelling?
Yes, yes.
So what Brian means is that Unforgivable Love is a retelling of Dangerous Liaisons, which was originally a novel written in the 1700s and then became a popular film that has been made in different versions. I know at least 4 film versions of Dangerous Liaisons. And I've had a bit of an obsession with that story for a while. And it occurred to me that that I had something to say about that story, and that was working in my mind for a very long time. And then one day, my friend Jenny, who is a screenwriter, she says to me, "Somebody should make a version of that story with Black people." And that a light bulb just went off. I was like, "Oh!" And I know exactly what it's going to be, and it's going to be in Harlem, and it's going to be in the 1940s, and it's going to be glamorous and beautiful, and I just got excited about that. And when you feel that kind of excitement, for me anyway, it's like that means I'm going to write this, I'm going to finish it, because I have a love and an energy for the project. And so that's what that book became, and it grew in a way that creatively as I worked on it, it's something that's wholly my own. So you can see the thread of the Dangerous Liaisons plot in there with the seduction and all of that, but the story is wholly me and my love and my obsessions. And so I just very excited. I love that book.
I just think it's such an interesting and very cool thing to do, and you can tell your passion for it and your skill with it really comes through.
Thank you.
So another one that we touched on is This Child of Faith, that you co-wrote with Tane. And you want to talk a little bit about that book and what it was like to writing it with your son?
Yeah, that story, that book is about the story of our family's faith journey. And when people say you wrote a book with your son, and he was 12 at the time that we wrote this, what they don't understand is that I just felt his voice needed to be represented in the book, not just me writing about it. So I created a format where I write the main narrative, but in each chapter, his name is Tane. So in each chapter, there is Tane's take, where he is, he gets to tell his side of the story. So that book came about, but unfortunately, because of the tragedy in our community, because I live in Sandy Hook, and Tane was present in the school the day of the shootings. And we had started attending an Episcopal church the year before. And the tragedy made me aware of the fact that Tane's faith had already taken hold in such a way that he was being supported by it, which I thought was an amazing thing. And as I looked back on the whole journey of our family from then up until now, it occurred to me that not only was his faith growing, that he had influenced and changed my faith as well, even though I was already a spiritual person. So I decided to write this book because I wanted to just share our journey. I didn't want to do a how-to book, but here's how you raise a child of faith. I wanted to show, here's how it happened for us. Here are the struggles. Here's what I'm learning. Here's what he's learning, and hoping that people could take that and somehow take from it a way to find their own way into having faith in their family. So yeah, that was, I'm really proud of that book. I love, traveling with him and speaking about it. I feel like it's a gift. I never expected to write such a book.
What a great learning experience and, kind of cooperative thing to be able to do together. I think that's really wonderful.
Yeah. I still think about the time when I got the finished book and I went to pick him up from school, and I just put it there on the passenger seat, and he gets into the car and he sees it and he says, "We did it," or he gives me a high five. I'm like, "Yes, yeah, Ting, we did it."
That's very cool. What a wonderful thing to do with your child. I mean, have that kind of a mutual success story. So I don't know if you can tell us much about any new book projects that you have coming up.
Like I said, I just sent, some pages off to my agent. That's going to be another novel, and it's going to be another retelling. So we'll see how that's going to work out. I'm hoping to, I think I told you back when, when we were at Drew, that I'm working up something about Thomas Merton. And I finally have some brain space on the table where I can really dig into that over these next couple of weeks. So I hope to get a book proposal together about some things I have in my mind about Thomas Merton, the Trappist monk.
Excellent. That'll be well received, I'm sure. I bet Pericles will love that.
Yeah, I would think so, right?
So another conference that we're going to be working on together is in Indianapolis, March 13th and 14th. Sophfronia is going to be one of our speakers there. Do you want to give a preview of your presentation there?
Oh goodness. Well, I like to present tools, right, to help us get the abstract onto the page. So we're going to be playing with some tools, metaphor in particular, just to help people know that it's sometimes writing is not just about getting what happened on the page, right? Reportage. We tend to think that writing nonfiction is just reporting. Well, this is what happened to me. But what makes what happened to you accessible to others is the way you put it on the page, to bring reflection to the story, to bring beautiful writing that helps people connect with pain, joy, love. How do you bring abstract emotion to the page so that the reader can connect to it? That's what we're going to be working on in Indianapolis, ways to make your writing accessible, to make your experience not universal, but just more able to connect with your reader.
Very cool. We're looking forward to that. So one last question for you. We mentioned that there's a conference series that I produce called Publishing in Color, and it's intended to increase the number of books that are published by groups that have traditionally been underrepresented: African Americans, Asian Americans, Latino, Native Americans, etc. And so Sophfronia was one of the keynote speakers at the very first Publishing in Color conference that we had last year, which was kind of a watershed event, I felt. But tell us a little bit about what your experience was there, what your feeling is about that.
You know, I was surprised that, to me, this has been an ongoing thing, right? Like, there's a whole movement around having more diverse books for children, that this has been a question going on in the publishing world for a very long time. So when you started publishing in color, I was curious as to who was going to come to the table and what is missing for them that isn't already out there. And that's what surprised me, is that there were a lot of writers of color who still didn't know the avenues in and still saw only roadblocks. So that was really gratifying to be able to say, your voice matters and people are looking for your voice, which I think is something that they didn't realize as well. We talked a lot about writing spiritually, and there are writers who, especially writers of color, who just live their faith, right? It's just an automatic thing. And I don't think it occurred to them, number one, that they could put it on the page, and number two, that it's marketable, right? So I like thinking that we opened up a new world for the writers in that conference during those days. And that was exciting.
Yeah, I felt the same way too. I mean, the enthusiasm and the, appreciation and kind of the community building,
Yeah.
The relationship building that went on at that conference was just awesome.
Yeah.
So thank you for playing a big part in that.
It was exciting. I was thrilled to be a part of it and looking forward to the next one.
So I think we've more than exhausted the time that we had planned together. Is there anything else that you wanted to chat about while we're here?
I want to say, if you want to write. So many times I get questions about agents, about publishing, and when I ask further about what the person is writing about, so many times that person is not writing. They don't have the book. They have an idea, they have a thought, and really all of what we're talking about is moot unless you have something to show that agent, that editor, or whomever, to have something on the page. Even if it's not the book itself, if you have a proposal, always be seeking to put something on the page, because that's what's going to matter at the end of the day. You have to have written.
Wonderful advice. Well, Sophfronia, thank you so much for joining us. It's always such a pleasure to gain the advantage of your insight. You're such an impressive person, and I know it'd be really valuable for all of our attendees to hear from you. So thanks very much for joining us.
Oh, you're welcome, Brian. Thank you for having me.
All right. Bye, everybody.